Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our virtual Common Read experience featuring the distinguished lecturer, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, and tonight's moderator, Dean of Lord International Honors College, Dr. Omar Ali. I am now going to give the floor to Dr. Ali.
Thank you, Portia. Welcome everybody and good evening. Thank you for joining us, all 150 of you who are beaming in, and perhaps some of you are together in the space watching this, and we want to make this interactive, so please use the question, the Q&A icon on the bottom there. You can ask a question and we'll get to that after the ambassador speaks. So I have the pleasure of introducing our distinguished speaker this evening. And I do want to thank my colleagues here, Portia and Eric and others, Amanda Shipman and IT, for helping to make this happen. And also our colleague Dan Friedman from Let's Learn and the Eastside Institute in this partnership. And also colleagues from the Islamic Studies Research Network. A shout out to Alyssa Gabe and Asa Egger. So this evening, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed is going to be speaking on the topic of Journey into Europe, Islam, Immigration, and Identity. Ambassador Akbar Ahmed is the Ibn Khaldoon Chair of Islamic Studies at American University in Washington, D.C. A graduate of Birmingham University, he received his master's from Cambridge University and PhD from the University of London. His career has included a number of distinguished posts and appointments, including as a fellow at the Brookings Institution, the first distinguished chair of Middle East and Islamic Studies at the US Naval Academy, the Iqbal Fellow at the University of Cambridge, and teaching positions at Harvard and Princeton universities. Ambassador Ahmed dedicated more than 3 decades to the civil service of Pakistan, including as political agent in the tribal areas, including Waziristan, and the Pakistan High Commissioner, and served as Pakistan High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland. His expertise has earned high praise around the world. The BBC called him, quote, the world's leading authority on contemporary Islam. His many and critically acclaimed projects include not just academic books, but documentaries, plays, poetry, a feature film, and even a comic book. Dr. Ahmed's book, Journey into Europe, examines relations between the West and the Islamic world. The book has been featured in multiple summer reading lists and received positive reviews in a number of places, including the New York Times. Notably, Ambassador Ahmed presented and narrated a 6-part BBC TV series a number of years ago called Living Islam. And he's produced, as I mentioned, both poetry and plays. His play, Noor and the Trial of Dara Shikoh, have been staged in different parts of the world. And as if this wasn't enough, he writes a weekly column for the Daily Times, one of Pakistan's leading newspapers, and has remained committed to service and creating meaningful dialogue. He was trustee of World Faiths Development Dialogue, chaired by Lord George Carey, the former Archbishop of Canterbury. He was a charter member of the Interfaith Coalition on Mosques and a member of the Washington Muslim Jewish Advisory Council. His awards would literally take our entire time here together to list and to describe. I'm not joking. But let me say on a personal note that Ambassador Ahmed, who I met many moons ago, when he warmly welcomed me and my family to his home, I think that he has so many accomplishments, but the thing that I think touches me most is his kindness and attention to people. And I think that we are all just really privileged and honored to have him here with us. So I'm happy to welcome you, Ambassador Ahmed.
Thank you so much, Omar. Thank you. I'm quite overwhelmed and almost speechless. It's such a beautiful and moving introduction that you've made. It's such an honor to be here on this panel. Omar, you know how highly I regard you. I'm grateful. I know we worked very hard in setting this lecture. It's taken some time, but we've got it in the right place. And I want to thank you and your wonderful team, Portia, and all the team that's worked with you and the various departments on campus. I do want to also thank the people who are participating, including some friends of mine like Professor Ray Skupin, who's here, and my friend Professor Noor, who's just sent a message from Islamabad saying that he can't see the image on the screen. So I hope we can do something about that. So with that, let me just plunge in because we don't have so much time and I'd like to spend time talking to and interacting with your students. So let me start at the beginning, at the start, which for us, in this period of history, for all of us, old, young, American, non-American, black, white, it really all begins on 9/11. I arrived in the United States just before 9/11. I'd come here earlier, I'd come several times, but permanently I moved just before 9/11. And it was a very different America. And a lot of your younger students will not know what that America was like. It was a society, a nation in full bloom. America was literally the richest, most powerful, mightiest, most exciting, most confident nation on earth. It was as if there was no limit to what it could do. And I felt quite exhilarated to be in America, just to be here and drink in this atmosphere of exuberance that permeated the atmosphere. And there were several theories, academic theories that were floating around. Francis Fukuyama, just a couple of years earlier, had written a paper which made a big impact. And he argued that it is the end of history. History has come to an end. All societies are going to be moving towards what the United States was at that moment in time. So the United States was the end of history. That was the end of the human quest, as it were, to arrive at a certain point in the arc of history. There was President Khatami of Iran. He was president of Iran. He gave a very interesting talk at the United Nations in which he called for a dialogue of civilizations. So here was the president of Iran reaching out and suggesting a dialogue, a friendship, a bridge, reaching out his hand. So some interesting things were happening. Tom Friedman wrote his books and he argued that it was the period of globalization, that the world is globalized, we're all part of one society. And globalization, in effect, he argued, he defined it as meaning Americanization. For him, globalization meant Americanization. And there was also Huntington, Samuel Huntington. Now, at that stage, when I arrived, Huntington was one of the many theorists, one of the many scholars who had written a theory and put it out there. He had taken a phrase from Bernard Lewis, who was at Princeton, who was a serious scholar, a historian who knew the Arab world. And he wrote a paper first in which he used the phrase, first of all, he used the phrase Muslim rage, the roots of Muslim rage, and he used the phrase, the clash of civilizations. So Huntington took this particular phrase, the clash of civilizations, picked it and took it out of context, and I'll tell you why I say that, and then built on it. And it made a resonance. It made a resonance, I'm talking about the 1990s, when there was a kind of a placid atmosphere in the United States. Why it made a resonance was that I found myself just before coming here on a visit to Morocco as a guest of the universities there. And people were asking me about Huntington. And I said, why are you so worried about Huntington? And then I happened to be in Pakistan and I happened to be calling on the president of Pakistan, who was an old former Christian college mate, a friend from that college days. And the first thing he asked me was, why does the West want confrontation with the Muslim world? And I said, what do you mean? What are you referring to? And he said, Huntington's theory, and he's at Harvard, and therefore it must have the backing of government. I said, no, universities don't work like that in the West. So it had touched a nerve. And then 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, the media, and I was in Washington in the thick of things. I was in class. I was in class teaching one of my first classes. The plane flew into the Pentagon. So literally, I saw my class disintegrating. I saw the look of puzzlement, horror, uncertainty. And I had been in service. I had been in the tribal areas. I had an idea of administration. I had an idea of American society and our society back home. And I knew that if this was what it seemed to be, which was an attack on America, innocent people killed for no rhyme or reason, I knew it would be terrible in terms of the retribution, in terms of the gap of understanding, misunderstanding between Muslims and non-Muslims. I knew that there would be a problem because Muslims are just not prepared for that kind of onslaught on their identity, their culture, their integrity, and so on. And as the day proceeded, I decided, literally, I said, all right, from today, whatever little experience I've had, whatever little work I've done in this life, and not much, but whatever it is, I'm going to throw it into an attempt to do my little bit in creating bridges, promoting understanding. And so for literally after that, Omar, it was 24 hours round the clock. It was literally White House, Pentagon, BBC, CNN. It was non-stop and non-stop literally till today. So it just went on and on and on. And in spite of that, I felt that like, what is the expression, a hamster in that little wheel. You just keep running round and round and you're not really making an effort. In fact, Bishop John Chain, the Bishop of Washington, the senior rabbi at the Washington Hebrew congregation, and myself, we formed an Abrahamic, it was an Abrahamic trio really, and the press began to call us the spiritual three musketeers. We were all over the place. We were on television. We went to the universities to promote understanding and interfaith. And they said to me, they said, it's like we keep running up the hill and you go up to the summit and you find yourself back on the base the next morning and then you have to climb it up again. It was a bit like that because while we were running, there were people in the world creating a lot of mischief and trouble and violence. So it was a constant battle. And the reason that was happening, and again, I go back to my own experience in the Muslim world, was because there had been an accumulation of problems in the Muslim world. There was a problem of the division between the very rich and the very poor. There was a problem of the corruption of the elite. There was a problem of lack of education where the elite would siphon off funds for themselves and give really a bare minimum to education. The money allocated for education in the Muslim world today is very, very small, and it's in fact disgraceful. And this is a religion I want to emphasize to all the listeners today. This is a religion which emphasizes learning above all else. Learning and knowledge, this is the second most used word in the Quran, the holy book of the Muslims, after the word for God. So in the Quran, God is constantly saying, acquire knowledge, and for men and women. Very important, men and women. And please note this, especially in the context of what's happening in Kabul. So these are the problems that had been accumulating over the decades in the Muslim world. And they were like a pressure cooker. They were ready to burst. So 9/11 was a kind of burst. But what happened? Again, I was privileged. I was in the front row of the drama, sitting in Washington, watching the drama. And I saw that America had reacted angrily. It had reacted, if you remember, President Bush used the word anger many times. You should feel our anger. And I recalled the wise Benjamin Franklin's motto, his saying, that what begins in anger ends in shame. Very wise man. I mean, just think about this. In anything you do in life, if you do something with anger, it's going to end in shame. It's going to embarrass you. And I was at the National Press Club the next month in October. So this happened in September. I was in the National Press Club in October. And there were some very distinguished people on the panel. I had just come, but I was asked to be on the panel. And there's a packed audience, packed, a who's who of Washington, television, radio, everything. This was the first big event in Washington. So people didn't know what was happening, but I could sense the anger, the emotion. And I really felt that this audience is ready to go in any direction. It's just going to go and literally catch the first person they suspect and hang him up from a tree. This was a very frightening emotion. And a superpower, I felt, cannot behave like that. It just cannot, because it demeans itself, it is counterproductive, and in the end, it's not going to do any good for itself. So I said, when my term came, I said, look, I want to share 3 things with you. Number one, I know that you're going to go into Afghanistan. You know, we're going to go charging in. But when you go into Afghanistan, please have a clear objective. Don't just go charging in without knowing what you want. Do you want to blast every Afghan from the face of this earth? Do you want to change the government? Do you want to change the structure? Do you want to change the educational structure? What do you want? What is your objective? Number 2, what is your exit strategy? When you decide to leave, and you sooner or later have to decide, how will you leave? And think of what actually happened. Omar, think of those disgraceful, shameful scenes of the C-70 trundling down the runway and Afghans running alongside me. It's just mind-boggling, and what it says for the image of our image and the image of the Muslim world. So this was my second point. My third point was, I said, if you're going to go into that society, try to understand that is a very different kind of society. It is tribal society. Afghan tribal society has been the graveyard of empires. The British went in twice in the 19th century. The first Anglo-Afghan War, the second Anglo-Afghan War. The first Anglo-Afghan War ended in 1842 with one soldier, Major Bryden, medical officer, sitting on a half-starved horse outside the Jalalabad fort. And when the people galloped out and said, where's the army, the grand army of the Indus? He said, I am it. The entire army had been destroyed. It was a colossal blow to the British Empire. Nothing like this had happened before. The 20th century, we saw the Afghans taking on the Russians, the Soviets. Now, these giant killing exercises come with a great deal of sacrifice. And you'll see Afghans today without limbs, without homes, their families destroyed. It's been terrible, the devastation, but they will continue to stand up and fight, because they are literally, I think, the proudest people on earth in terms of their identity, in terms of their own culture, and in terms of their history. So, I mean, I don't want to romanticize this, but this is the history of Afghanistan. And why? Again, as a social scientist, as an anthropologist, there's an explanation, and the explanation comes from their code of honor, which is called Pashtunwali. Pashtunwali is the code of the Pashtuns. And it comprises of this. Number 1, courage. So a Pashtun must uphold courage and honor. It's very important to them. Number 2, hospitality. So the Afghan, the Pashtun will show hospitality at the cost of his own family, culture, economy. But he must be hospitable to his guest. Number 3, the code of revenge. Very important in Pashtun society. And there's a famous saying, I took revenge after 100 years, and I took it too soon. So very often these revenge sequences are passed on from father to son, but yet they will take it. So when you combine all this, I knew that the Americans had walked into something that, and they had no idea what they were walking into. And the American strategy was conventional warfare. You go in, you blast the enemy, you take the capital, and it's over. Checkmate, game is up. And I said this, I said, that's when the game begins for the Afghan. Go back to the Afghan wars in the 19th, 20th centuries. That's when they all disappear into the mountains and come back when the snows melt. You've got to understand the culture of that area. I said this, right? So you cannot go charging in and then cause yourself harm. And that's exactly what's happened. 20 years later, we've spent trillions of dollars, trillions. We've killed thousands of our own people, these beautiful young men and women. We've killed them, we've mutilated them, we've damaged them, and we've killed hundreds of thousands of local people. We don't even think about them, but they also have fathers and sons and families. And as I thought about this situation, I began to realize that in fact, we were, that's the United States, we were involved in similar tribal enterprises and engagements in Yemen, in Somalia, in West Africa, in the Sahel, in Balochistan, in the tribal areas of Pakistan, border areas between Afghanistan and Pakistan. All these are tribal societies. All the societies I mentioned are tribal societies. The same code of honor exists for these societies as well. So again, it was crucial that we understand the people we are dealing with and how to deal with them. It's not that you can't deal with them. They're not irrational people. They have their societies have been functioning and operative for centuries. And it's one of the most successful forms of society because it has survived. And unfortunately, with the 9/11 events and the war on terror, what you also saw, another pattern, which was the central government, the local central government, which had been at odds with their own people on the periphery. These tribes live on the periphery. Most of them, you'll see, are living on the periphery. And very often they have access to minerals, to resources. And they are in conflict with the central government primarily because of these resources. And what I also saw was that the central government now used the excuse of the war on terror against these tribal societies. So all they had to say was to the Americans, by the way, those guys, that tribe is full of terrorists. That's it. So down came the drones. Waziristan, which I had been in charge of for over 2 years, was the most droned place on earth. And I wrote about the impact of the drone on ordinary wazirs in Masood, or the ordinary family, the impact it has on little kids who can't sleep at night. They're all traumatized because they say just you hear the drones buzzing overhead and you wonder when is it going to come down like the angel of death. So what we did was kill 2 or 3 or 4 bad guys. We assumed that they were the bad guys. But in the process, we antagonized maybe 200, 300 other individuals who were neutral to us, and they also joined in the war against us. You saw that in Kabul when there was a drone used for that individual Afghan, and the media at first said he was ISIS, he was Al-Qaeda, and it turned out that he was not only an ordinary Afghan, he was an Afghan who had worked and served with the American forces for many, many years. And we ended up killing 7 children. There was a little girl of 2 years old who was killed. Now, these people are human. They also have emotions. They also have a sense of belonging, a humanity, and we must be sensitive to this humanity. This is also what I observed, Omar, that in the 20 years, as this war on terror progressed, we began to lose our sense of our own humanity. Because the American nation, the identity of the American nation is rooted in the vision of the founding fathers. And there's a great sensitivity. I know that there are 1 or 2 problems in terms of slavery, in terms of women's rights and so on. But the larger vision that they created was a vision which was inclusive, and they created a nation with, above all, great optimism and hope for the future. So that when we arrive in the 20th century and now the 21st century, we can hope, and we can hope to include everyone in society. This is what they created. And at the heart of the vision of the founding fathers, I maintain, maybe I'm wrong, and I'd like to hear your colleagues on this, but at the heart of this was the notion of religious pluralism. And religious pluralism meant compassion for the other, whatever the color of his skin, whatever the religion they belong to. This is the American character, the American identity that the founding fathers worked on and dreamt of. And what I realized over this 20-year period, unfortunately, was that concepts like decapitated, concepts like collateral damage, like waterboarding, they became part of our vocabulary. They became part of the jokes that the comedians would repeat on the chat shows. Waterboarding became like a joke. Why? Because we were doing it to someone else. We began to lose that sense of human empathy. Very, very important point, because we are not any old nation. This was the United States of America, and I go back to my earlier remarks that this was the #1 nation of the world before 9/11. Now, 20 years later, we look at the position. 9/11 when this period of history began, and the fall of Kabul when this period of history ended. So we have this 20-year chunk of history. And now we're looking into the future. And into the future, what lessons are we learning? What lessons have we learned? What lessons can we take? We need to rediscover very quickly and very strongly our own sense of humanity. So we need to jettison notions of decapitation, killing, torturing, murdering, and develop ideas of compassion and reaching out and friendship and kindness. This is part of the American culture. This is part of Christian culture. Whether you're a Christian, I'm not a Christian, but I know that this is part of the Christian ethos. If you're not a Christian by religion, you're a Christian by ethos. Jesus Christ constantly emphasizes forgiveness, kindness, love one another. Now, these are features which I know affect millions of people in America. We want the world to know this. We want the world now to see the Americans arriving, not abandoning the world, but arriving in the world now with educational programs, development programs, not with drones and missiles, and showing the world, which is now desperately in need, because this is a new phase of history. Much has changed. Just in 20 years, history has changed. You see what's happened in these 20 years. 9/11, and if you're Rip Van Winkle and you woke up now 20 years later, you say, my God, what world is this? America seems to be, all the pundits, all the experts are now talking about the decline in America. Every pundit is predicting this. And you look at the other empires, you're seeing China emerging, you see Russia emerging, India emerging. So America is no longer number one. It is number one even now, but there are other people contending for that number one. In order for us to remain in that number one slot and be meaningfully number one, not just through force, not through muscle alone, we need to be much more sensitive to our own character. And I'm also studying Eastern religions, and I'm very impressed by the notion that the followers of Lao Tzu have of yin and yang. You know, the yin yang, and that image where the two of them meet and fit like this, and that's a kind of cliche, and you see it in sports goods and all over the place. But you know, it's a very subtle concept. Yin is the female part of the equation. Yang is the aggressive masculine part. And their philosophy is that if the two are in balance, the yin and the yang, then you're in balance and the universe is in balance. Now, I really believe that in some senses, in the last 20 years, we were out of balance. And the yang became too powerful. Yang was too dominant. So all we want to do was punch the other guy, or torture the other guy, or waterboard the other guy. We need to rediscover, bring out our yin. And that is what the philosophers of the East have told us. I think we'll be helped greatly if we listen to them and follow them. I want to just end with one or two points from Islam as a Muslim scholar. The Islam teaches us again and again the importance of learning, the importance of knowledge. I mentioned the significance of knowledge in Islam. There's a very famous saying of the Prophet of Islam, which I'm very fond of. I'm fond of quoting at least. It goes like this: the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. So the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. So just think of that. Today in the world, we look at all these very violent groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and so on, doing terrible things in terms of violence, misbehavior towards women and minorities. That's not Islamic at all. No Islamic scholar will condone their behavior or say that is Islamic. They need to be talked to, and they need to be told what is proper Islam and what needs to be accepted as Islam. But they need to rediscover the concept that knowledge is more important in Islam than the blood of the martyr. Because they've reversed this saying. They've reversed it to say that martyrdom is number one, you go to paradise and so on. But they need to re-reverse it and bring it back to knowledge and learning, so that once again the Muslim world, as it did a long time in the past, it can rediscover its preeminence in terms of knowledge and learning. And I'll end by quoting Ibn Khaldoon. I hold the chair for Ibn Khaldoon, who's one of my great heroes. is a great scholar who lived in the 14th and 15th centuries, a remarkable man. And for the Republicans amongst your audience, I'm sure you have a lot of devout Republicans. Let me point out that Ronald Reagan, the one historian, one scholar he quoted repeatedly, not once, was Ibn Khaldoon. I'm not sure how many of your audience know that, but he quoted Ibn Khaldoon. That's the kind of impact Ibn Khaldoon made on the world. And he lived centuries ago. And in some senses, he is the father of economics and not Adam Smith. And his theory of tribal societies becomes very relevant to us because we are dealing with tribal societies. Just think of what I've just said. We are all over the world dealing with tribal societies. We are in Somalia, we are in Yemen, we are in Afghanistan, dealing with tribes, with codes of honor, codes of behavior. And Ibn Khaldoon gives us that charter, the key to understand and open and enter tribal societies. So the Muslim world has a lot to offer, and we should reach out in our hands in friendship, take that hand and help create a strong, stable polity in the Muslim world. Again, through education, through supporting women, through supporting those students and the young generation who want education. My heart breaks when I look at the scenes in Kabul, where you have all these really very bright Afghans, young boys and girls who want education, who want to be part of the modern world. And now they're dead scared. They're petrified that their enthusiasm may be seen as somehow being anti-Islamic. Now that is a travesty. And that is something I really believe that Muslim scholars have to speak, have to stand up and speak and nail their colors to the mast. They cannot just sit it out and pretend it's not their battle. It is their battle. And the world has to understand this very complex situation and help them in their argument. So with these few remarks, Umar, if you feel this is the right time, we can break here and then open it up for a Q&A.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to applaud.
Thank you, Umar. Thank you.
Others out there are doing the same. So thank you so much for those observations, the sort of the history that you lay out. I want to invite people to use the Q&A icon to ask questions. I see that we have a few there. Let's see. Okay. While we're sort of developing our list of questions there, let me ask you something that I think it might be helpful to hear your thoughts on this, which is that the Islam and the West have been sort of placed as sort of almost oppositional, right? And I think that one of the things I very much appreciate about your own books and your writings and your lectures is how you talk about how Islam is not a separate history, but there are distinctions, but it's an integral part of the West. I mean, you mentioned Ibn Khaldoon in some ways as the founder of economics and his other insights. But maybe you could say a little bit about how is it that Islam has shaped the West, because it's a very big topic, but I think something that I think people would appreciate hearing you speak a little bit about.
Well, Umar, that's a great question because it's one of my favorite subjects. Mm-hmm. Here's how Islam has shaped the West. And I really want your students to listen carefully and begin to take notes. Number one, philosophy. Ibn Rushd, the great philosopher of Andalusia, is considered by American professors as the man who brought modern philosophy to the world. And he's so great that there's a crater on the moon named after him. Mm-hmm. I mean, just think of what I'm saying. He's so great that the greatest Catholic philosopher and scholar, St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Christians in the audience will immediately understand, because this man, St. Thomas Aquinas, has been referred to by the Pope, not this Pope alone, the last 4 or 5 popes, as the greatest model of a Christian scholar, St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, do you know that St. Thomas Aquinas quoted Ibn Rushd over 500 times? Now, Omar, if you were to quote a scholar 500 times, historians judging your work will say, Omar was really impressed by this chap, right? Think of 500, over 500 times. He didn't always agree with him, he agreed, disagreed, but the impact on him was enormous. Now, this is philosophy alone. The eye surgeon, Ibn Haytham, he's the man who first began to experiment with optics, which led to the camera obscura. So the very notion of cinema and eye surgery comes from Ibn Haytham, who conducted years and years of surgery on eyes. Avicenna, the great physician, with his medical experiments and his use of the catgut for stitching up wounds. These people were way ahead of Europe then. I mean, there was no comparison because this was the golden age of Islam. I'm talking about the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries. In terms of ideas, again, what this will be startling to your audience. The most famous novels in the West are novels like Robinson Crusoe, Robinson Crusoe, Dante's Inferno. These are very much influenced by Islamic literature, and I could actually give you the details. The details are in my book, Journey into Europe, but they're literally, I mean, Dante, I don't want to say this, but it's literally like he plagiarized his Inferno, the whole notion of Beatrice going up to the 7 stages as she goes deeper and deeper on her journey. Even the language, as they pass by the stars and the moon, etc., is taken from the Arabic, the original Arabic, and then translated into Italian and then picked up by Dante. And I'm not saying something original, this has been established. Robinson Crusoe is again directly from Ibn Tufayle's great novel about this man who's stranded on an island. That sounds familiar. Who has to then think, he has to grapple with issues of governance. How does he deal with issues of morality, of governance, of faith, of worship? All these then are raised by, as we know, our character Robinson Crusoe in the novel, adapted to the English, the English context. I could give many examples like this. Even the notion of flight. Now, we all know that flight, we had Leonardo da Vinci experimenting with flight. We know the Wright brothers experimented with flight. Now, Ibn Firnas in Cordoba, Ibn Firnas, actually, again, man of many parts. All these men were incredible geniuses. So they were writers and mathematicians and astronomers and poets. All of them were poets. Poetry was a very important art. Ibn Firnas was determined to find the secrets to flight. So he strapped on his wings and went up on a hill and jumped off. And lo and behold, he flew for 10 minutes. This is the story now. We are talking about a long time back. But if you go to Cordoba, you will see a huge bridge in the shape of wings. And that is the Spanish government honoring Ibn Firnas. And if you go to the moon, there's a crater on the moon in honor of Ibn Firnas. So these are not forgotten. I'm not just mentioning names that were not significant in history. I'm talking about substantial figures. So when the West says, and I don't want to go too much into this, but the very notion of the Enlightenment is coming from these scholars of the Muslim world, which then come into Europe. And from Europe, John Locke picks up these ideas. It crosses the Atlantic, and Jefferson writes Jefferson's notions of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All these are coming directly from Muslim scholars via European scholars, which Jefferson is obviously influenced by, and Jefferson acknowledges that. So when we talk about the East and the West, to me, it's meaningless. I have had the privilege of being educated in a Christian school first, run by Catholic priests up in North Pakistan, and then by American Presbyterian. I don't think they're priests as such, but they were there doing their work for God, promoting their religion and their culture. And they were wonderful teachers. So I owe a lot of my education to my teachers who are Christian. I don't see myself in terms of East, West, Muslim, non-Muslim. I'm just grateful that I was able to read. And even now, I tell my students this. I say that to me, my whole philosophy of learning is inspired by Socrates. I really feel at this stage of my life, and I've written books, you were so kind in your introduction, I've done all this, and I really feel I've done nothing. I really feel, my God, I have a long, long way ahead of me. The mountain is huge. It's like Socrates, when Socrates was told, what do you know? He said, the only thing I know is that I don't know anything. You see, so in a sense, all of us discover humility and genuine humility at a certain age when you realize you're confronting this vast ocean of learning, which you really don't know about. So this whole subject of Islam and the West and why and how is fascinating. And I hope your students who are listening today will be challenged to pick up the subject, absorb it, and contribute to it, to try to create a better America, a stronger America, a more sensible America, and reach out to the world, especially the Muslim world, because the Muslim world right now is going through a period of great hurt. And why is it going through a period of great hurt? Because the last 20 years, it has been bombed and droned and tortured all over the Muslim world. And that's why my book, The Thistle and the Drone, had a subtitle which said how America's war on terror became a war on tribal Islam. And then I analyzed, I correlated where this war was being conducted. It was being conducted in these tribal societies. So those tribal societies were literally being decapitated for no rhyme or reason. There's someone at the wrong place, wrong time, and he was picked up and taken off. And again, I want to point out the perfidy, the corruption of Muslim rulers who very often took advantage of these tribesmen who are illiterate, who are marginalized, and made money out of them. I think President Musharraf mentioned this in his book. He said, I had these tribesmen picked up and they charged, I think, 5 million or 20 million or whatever for each individual tribesman, who they handed over to the Americans. Americans flew them to Guantanamo Bay and said, you're a terrorist. And this chap may have been a shepherd. He may have just been looking after his sheep or gone to take his children to school, and he was picked up. So there has been a lot of injustice, a lot of crisis, a lot of disruption. And I know Americans are good-hearted people. I can give you the example of Foreman Christian College, where for generations, they've been teaching women, men who come out there at great cost to themselves, but contribute to that society. This is the time for Americans now to step up and literally say, I want to salvage my country because it has gone through this terrible period. How can I help it? And not, I find there's too much of this chest beating and anti-American sentiment growing. We hate America, America's terrible. America's done some bad things, but this is the time for it to now reemerge and help it reemerge and recover its own personal character.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There are a lot of comments in the chat, people talking about thanking you for how inspiring this was and sharing your perspective and your work. There is a series of questions that I'm seeing here from people wanting to know how they can help. And I'm just going to pick up on one, actually, one of my dear colleagues here, Marcia Hale, in Peace and Conflict Studies, says, thank you so much for sharing with this community tonight, Dr. Ahmed. How can scholars help in supporting the Afghan people now? And what can students do? I'll just add to that because students are also asking what can be done, because I think in the news, it's very present in people's minds.
You see, Ahmad, this question alone confirms what I've been saying about the goodness of the Americans. They're asking this question that establishes something, and they have to follow it up by saying, all right, in our own way, we are going to do something. And what do I mean by something? And don't just restrict it to Afghanistan. Remember, this is not just an Afghanistan problem. The problems I'm talking about, the gaps between the rich and the poor, the lack of education, the need for development in those societies, the need to promote the education of women especially, all these problems exist right across the swathe of Muslim societies. So pick your favorite country, pick your favorite area and say, all right, I may go and spend a summer there. I may go and work in a school. I may write to people there. I may write about people there. All these things are very important. Reach out your hands in friendship to tell them that we are not your enemies. We are not here to kill you and wipe you out and exterminate you with all this language we've been hearing. But we are here to show you that we as Americans have warm hearts and good, sensible minds and bodies, and we want to come out and make friends with you and help you lead better lives, especially in this time of crisis. We're living through this terrible pandemic. We've got this climate change. There's a world crisis taking place. And America needs to now reach out and play its role. And this is where your question, Marcia, your question about what can we do becomes relevant, because you need to make your voice heard. If nothing else, make your voice heard. Write about this. Write about it. Comment about it. Write an op-ed. But make your voice heard that there are Americans who feel like this and who are prepared to actually put their hand out in friendship.
Thank you very much. There are a number of other questions here. Well, let me see if I can sort of synthesize some of the questions here. I think that one of the things that's emerging from the series of questions is how is it that the US can really change its policy? Because what we're talking about, what you're describing is in some ways ordinary citizens trying to educate, trying to connect, reach out. But in your work as an ambassador and somebody who's worked with government, what do you see as the possibilities there at that level?
Again, a very good question, because as an ambassador, I often got in trouble because we have to remember there's a bureaucratic structure. There's a structure and we have to learn to work within that. Now, we are fortunate in America because this is a democracy. And ultimately, decisions are made on the basis of votes, on the basis of individuals getting to their senators and congressmen and women. And that is where you can make a difference. If Marcia were to write a letter to your local senators along certain lines, that would make an impact. And the senator or the congressman or woman would be careful about the policies on this particular subject. That is how it works in America. This is how democracy works. So if enough of you, students, professors, pick up a subject and work on it, it'll make an impact. That's what I really believe. And that's what you have to do. So in order for that to happen, a one-off lecture like this is not good enough, just not good enough. You have to understand the world you're living in. You have to understand it's a dangerous world. We've been through a traumatic experience. The fall of Kabul, really, it hasn't sunk into American minds and American hearts. But it is a huge, it's a catastrophe. And the implications are going to last into the next generation. Now, to come out of that and reassert yourself on the global stage is not only imperative, it's absolutely essential for your own mental health, for your political health, but also mental health. That's what we have to do. And in order to do that, we have to understand the world. And this new world that's emerging, you have China emerging, you have Russia, you have India, and what is our role in that? And we have to vigorously then make a place in that world for us. Now you've got this new alliance formed, AUKUS. Now, think about it. You suddenly have a new crisis. One crisis is barely finished, and we have another crisis opening up because China has now reacted very strongly to that. They feel that that is an alliance that has been formed to threaten them. Now, what does that mean? With two major world powers, they're not in conflict, not yet, but they're drifting into a situation where anytime now in the South China Seas or in East Europe or on any one of these flashpoints, it could spark into something bigger. Read your First World War and see how it began. It literally began with some person being shot in Sarajevo, and then it escalated quickly and became the First World War. No one wanted it. No one really wanted it. And it was the First World War. So you are scholars on campus. You have the privilege, and you have the privilege of working with a very, very fine scholar, that is Professor Omar Ali. Take advantage of this. Take advantage of the thinking, the scholarship, the grappling with ideas, and say, this is the world we're living in. What can we do? How can we make ourselves relevant? So it's not just about reading a book on campus. I really believe that students, and this is how I approach my students, that you have to give them ideas and let them then run with them, with these ideas. I never underestimate my students. They may be much younger than me, but they have to understand that it's their world and they have to run with it. You give them an idea, and believe me, they run with it, and they're brilliant. So I think this is a great opportunity for you to practice this point that I'm making.
Thank you. There is a question that I want to pull out from here from Asia Stone, asking, how have you balanced mental health with your extensive research and any hardships? I think this is a really important question, because I think a lot of people, as we live through the Black Lives Matter uprising and the attention on the plight of Black people in America and the violence, I think that this is a question that's becoming more relevant in terms of mental health.
Ahmed, this is a very important question, very important question. You know, it began to affect me when I used to watch these terrible scenes of what they did to that young man, and the Black Lives Movement began. It really began to affect me, because I began to say, just because someone belongs to one community or has a certain color of skin, he can just be picked up and shot just like that. That young man was, what was it? He had gone with the $20. There was a problem with some $20 bill. And you could see he was being throttled to death. That policeman had his knee on his neck. I saw that whole sequence. I was just horrified. It traumatized me. So I can imagine if I belonged to the Black community, I'd be doubly traumatized. Mm-hmm. So this is a genuine problem. And again, if you have the nation, as we are, United Nations, involved in overseas wars, not one war, I think there might be dozens of wars, young men and women, some of my students, coming back traumatized. You see, most of them have they have all these traumas after the event, after the the event that took place over there. And people don't understand. They've suddenly come, they've gone as cheerful young men, they've come back and they're lost in their own world. And sometimes they can become violent in their behavior. Mm-hmm. So we have to understand that we need to very consciously, in order to combat this, develop notions of compassion, mm-hmm. of love, of kindness. Perhaps the most important notion of humankind, of our species, is the notion of love. And I'm studying this, I'm writing my new book, is based on this. All the great faiths, if you look at Confucius or Lao Tzu or Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Hinduism, it's love, 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 love. Very important concept. So I think, Ahmed, this may seem a cliche, and I don't want someone to say that, oh, he's obviously a fan of John Lennon. But this notion of constantly repeating just the notion of love, just the notion of opening a door to some old woman, helping her cross the road, helping someone with their groceries, reaching out to people, saying, yes, hello, how are you, madam? Smile. I notice Americans have stopped smiling. There's so much tension and there's so much pain on their faces. Literally, when I came here first to the Institute for Advanced Study many, many years ago, Americans were very warm, outgoing people. Now I'm finding they're very tense people. They're very tense. They don't smile. Their face looks like they're going through a mental crisis. And very often they're pulling their gun out and just shooting someone. Mm-hmm. Literally, I mean, how many, what is the statistic now? 40, 50,000 being shot every year. Mm-hmm. That's just unacceptable. Right. When are we going to say we've got to stop this? When are we going to say the only way to stop this is to begin to talk about loving each other? There's nothing wrong with saying it's not being soft or being a sissy or being gay or whatever these slurs that people throw at each other. We have to reach out and love each other. And that, I think, is one of the great lessons of this culture and this age.
Absolutely. I wanted to share that part of what we talk about in the Honors College and in Let's Learn and my colleagues in the Eastside Institute is really drawing on our natural abilities to be improvisers as human beings and performers and to play. And I wanted to hear if you could say a little bit about how you handle when people say things that are very both incorrect, but also are very dismissive of things that you hold dear. And I wanted to hear, like, how is it that you process? This goes back to the mental health question, because I think this helps us position ourselves as better educators. So I wanted to hear a little bit.
Well, Omar, this is a question which I think any Muslim would answer with great pain, because after 9/11, now I'm talking as a Muslim, you're asking me specifically, after 9/11, as a Muslim, and by the way, Americans treated me very nobly. I was welcome, my wife and my family were welcome, so I had no personal problems. But I heard non-stop in the media, in remarks, abuse of my religion, my culture, my God, my prophet. How do you think I felt? We come from very traditional cultures. Now, I know that today most Americans are living in a secular culture. So, we don't bother so much. We are sensitive about some things, but by and large, we don't bother too much. But we come from cultures, the immigrants, that are very often traditional. And we do care for our ancestors and our cultures and our traditions. So to hear this kind of foul abuse non-stop about myself, my culture, my family, my people, to hear stories of young girls wearing a veil, brutalized or slapped or pushed, sometimes even killed. This happened. Mosques being attacked. And then, as I've always said, it's a slippery slope, because then the next round were the Jewish community. The anti-Semitism reared its ugly head. So you have Black lives, the Black community being terrorized and killed and attacked. Then you have the Jewish community. Then you have other communities. You have sex being involved, gender being involved. All these, because these are issues one by one, you go down your kind of prejudice. You begin to say, oh, my prejudice against this or that community, and you begin to target them. How do you think they're feeling there? Today, if you ask any member of any minority community, they will be feeling under siege, under threat. That is the starting point. We have to reach out and say, I'm here with you. It's that famous quotation from the pastor in Germany during Hitler's time, who said, who gave that famous quote, and he said that first they came for the so-and-so, and then the so-and-so, and the so-and-so. And finally, when they came for me, there was no one there to protect me or save me. So we're really in that situation, because America is such a mixed society of immigrants. Everyone here is an immigrant. We pretend we don't. We are not immigrants. We're all very pure and so on. But basically, American society is made up of immigrants. They may have been Irish and Scots and all 500 years ago, but they are coming from somewhere else. And that is the richness of American society. And that is what we have to cherish, nourish, and appreciate in each other. So when you say, how would you respond? I've always responded by trying to explain what this means to me, particularly religious issues, because I've tried to explain that for us, I respect my mother and father. So if someone abuses my father or mother, I will be hurt. I may not do anything about it because I'm a peaceful person, but I'll be hurt. I can't pretend I'm not going to be hurt. And the abuse against religion and against our religious figures is like that. It is like someone abusing our parents. And yet I've seen this happening, and it's really hurt me. And at times I felt very, very sad and very sorrowful, because I've said, this is the country I love. I've come here to settle, and I've come here to live among these people. And this is how they're treating me. This is the respect they're showing me. I won't do this. I won't disrespect people. Back in Pakistan, I used to be very, very adamant about protecting Christians. Even now, I champion them and fight for them in Pakistan, or Hindus or minorities. So again, we have to reach out where we are in the majority, and hope then that other people will reach out to us when we are in the minority.
Yes, I think that this last point is a beautiful point, which is that we need to be supporting all peoples, all minorities, whatever form that takes, and uplifting everyone. And I think love is very powerful, just as you were quoting that what begins with anger ends in shame. I think there is a true power in love, and we learned that from many people, including Dr. King and many others, and yourself. And I don't think that we should underestimate that force. With this, Ambassador, thank you so much for your time and all your wonderful comments and the teachings that you've offered. You're getting dozens of things in the chats here, people thanking you. We hope that you have a good evening. And I think that we should do what the ambassador is saying, is to, in some ways, serve ourselves as ambassadors and uplift others around us. So thank you all. Have a very good evening. Again, thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Umar. Thank you so much. And please give my love to your family and a big hug to the kids. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Allah Hafiz.